Welcome. This is D.L. Hughes from VelocityWriting.com, where you learn to write with speed, passion, purpose, and profitability. Lots of writers think of generative AI, like ChatGPT, as a despicable invention. They think it has no originality and is automated stealing from others. Yet, properly used, it can spark genius. Creative luminaries like William S. Burroughs and Bob Dylan were pioneers in what we today call generative AI. Oh, they did it without computers, but the process was almost the same. Hard to believe? Well, it's true, and the story is coming up in 10 seconds. Thank you for being here for an odd and interesting topic. Hey, I review the comments regularly, so please share your thoughts there. Do you want to see a video on a particular topic? Let me know in the comments. Many writers hate ChatGPT and other generative AI tools because they don't understand them. All they think is, hey, that thing is stealing my stuff. But that's not factual. First, because there's no such thing as an original idea. Thousands of years ago, even old King Solomon said, there is nothing new under the sun. All writers just reshape and recycle what they have read, seen, or experienced. So if anything, you are stealing, the ideas and inspiration of others and calling it your own because you put the old stuff together in new ways. So before we get to Burroughs and Dylan, let's look very briefly at how generative AI works. First, there is data collection. ChatGPT was trained on a diverse set from the internet, including websites, books, and articles. Search engines have had U.S. court permission to do this since Google was a pup. There will likely be more court cases, but the famous Google case found that using existing works in search results was transformative, and that's okay according to the fair use doctrine of the copyright law. Then, training comes next. The model uses machine learning techniques to see patterns, grammar, facts, and reasoning from the data set. It does not store specific data, but understands context and language structure. Notice it does not store specific copies of anyone's work, not an entire paragraph or anything like that. It's a data set, more like a spreadsheet than anything else. The algorithm understands context and language structure to generate prose when it responds to a unique user prompt. The output is as unique as any person who does research and reshapes existing knowledge. The third step is information extraction. So when someone writes a unique prompt, it extracts the randomized, recycled data from the data set. The input determines the output. When you enter a prompt, ChatGPT processes it using its learned patterns. It analyzes the prompt, determines the context, and generates a response by predicting the most appropriate and coherent content based on its training. And of course, finally, it generates prose. ChatGPT formulates the response by stringing together words and sentences that fit the context and intent of the prompt. Your output will change based on your input, that is, the prompt you craft. That's exactly how every writer's mind works, except ChatGPT works more efficiently. ChatGPT doesn't get distracted by email, social media, a need to get up and eat or pee. It never whines about writer's block. Burroughs and Dylan, among others, used the same type of generative AI process, but they used a manual system that accessed fewer data sets. It's called the cut-up technique. It was around before Burroughs and Dylan, but they put it to good creative use. Conventional wisdom says that Burroughs invented the cut-up method in the early 1950s, but that's not true. It had been around earlier as part of an artistic movement known as Dadaism. This artistic collective was called the vulgar herd in their time. It started in Zurich, spread to New York and Paris, and was a vibrant movement until the late 1920s. Dadaism was a reaction against the massive death and destruction of World War I. It was a repudiation of the society that created that war. The focus of Dadaism was on irrationality and included the literary works, music, and the visual arts. If you read my novel Jet Pink, you know that I'm a fan of Dadaism. Heck, the cut-up method was probably around long before Dadaism. It has been used for ransom notes since printing was invented. Burroughs got a lot of undeserved credit for inventing the cut-up method. He learned the technique from a Canadian artist and writer, Brian Gysin. Burroughs became well known for the cut-up method because he used the technique extensively and effectively in his famous Nova trilogy. That included Naked Lunch, The Soft Machine, and The Ticket That Exploded. He combined cut-up text with his original writing to create surreal and experimental novels and poems. Burroughs believed the cut-up method could break down conventional thinking and tap into the subconscious mind. Yikes, that sounds like the best creative practices for using ChatGPT. Before moving on to Dylan's process, let's understand the technique both Burroughs and Dylan used. Here's the classic cut-up process. Step 1, choose a source text. Start by selecting a source text that you want to cut up. This could be anything from a novel to a newspaper to a page from a magazine, or combine them all. Step 2, cut up the text into small pieces, either by hand or using a digital tool. You can cut the text into individual words, phrases, or sentences. Step 3, rearrange the pieces. Once you have cut up the text, shuffle the pieces around and rearrange them in a new order. You can do this randomly or with a specific goal in mind. Step 4, use the new text as a starting point for your writing. You can use it in the form that you pieced it together, or as a source of inspiration, or you can use parts of it in your writing. Here's the point you can't miss. The generative AI methodology I explained at the beginning and this cut-up technique are nearly identical. You break up the work of others and reassemble it into something unique. A tool like ChatGPT is just the cut-up method on steroids. Bob Dylan and the cut-up method. As we know, Bob Dylan is an American singer-songwriter who is often called one of the most influential musicians of modern times. He won a Nobel Prize in Literature. Dylan has been known to use the cut-up method in his songwriting. In an interview with Rolling Stone magazine, Dylan discussed how he used it to create the lyrics for his song Subterranean Homesick Blues. He said he took the lines from different sources, including newspapers and magazines, and cut them into small pieces. He rearranged the pieces to create the lyrics for the song. Dylan's method in Subterranean Homesick Blues was thought to be groundbreaking at the time, but he was just adapting an old method. He was re-envisioning found texts that originate in another form from which he created something unique. That's precisely what ChatGPT does. Dylan used the method later when he wrote his film Masked and Anonymous. His director and co-writer, Larry Charles, explained the process in a Business Insider article, which I've condensed for clarity. Charles said, Dylan brings out this very ornate box and dumps all these pieces of scrap paper on the table. Every piece of scrap paper had a little line scribbled on it. I realized that's how he writes songs. He takes these scraps, puts them together, and makes his poetry out of them. Larry Charles continued saying, we wound up writing in a very cut-up technique. We would just take scraps of paper, put them together, try to make them make sense, and find the story points within it. We finally wrote this very elaborate treatment. Dylan used different sources, including newspapers and magazines, for some of his songs, and it is likely the scraps of paper Larry Charles mentioned contain more of those, as well as Dylan's own random writings. This box of scrap paper with lines on each one is like a car with a manual transmission, for cut-up. ChatGPT does the same thing, but it's a car with an automatic transmission that you can use creatively. The cut-up method of creative writing is a powerful technique, but don't be a dummy with ChatGPT or other generative AI tools by merely cutting and pasting whatever it spews. Be like Burroughs and Dylan and process the output through the pool of knowledge and unique experiences that reside in your brain. ChatGPT may do the heavy lifting of making a cut-up, but you have to make it your own, just as Burroughs and Dylan and so many other creative people did before the advent of generative AI. The cut-up method can help writers create new and unexpected works of art by breaking down conventional thinking and tapping into the universal subconscious mind. If you're feeling stuck in your writing, try the cut-up method and see where it takes you. It's never been easier with ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. Have a great writing day.